What's going on, everybody? Mortem here. This time bringing you a look at Colony Ship, an indie CRPG from developer Iron Tower Studios, the people behind Age of Decadence and Dungeon Rats. Though Colony Ship is a game I have been looking forward to quite some time, as it has been in early access for a while and I've taken a few looks at it here and there. But just yesterday, from the time of this video, it has officially released, so we now have the full version of the game available, and I'll be running through it for a review, as I enjoyed the studio's previous work with Age of Decadence quite a bit, as that was also a CRPG that, while certainly clunky in places, had a lot of good ideas, a ton of replayability, and right away Colony Ship seems to have learned a lot from that initial outing, and brings a lot of those lessons to the table with this new title. So what is this game? What is it all about? Colony Ship puts us in the role of a shipborn, as they might be called, essentially a group or civilization traveling on a ship through space to another planet that is a generational ship. The people alive now likely won't see the arrival at the new planet, and they've also never known Earth. And as you might suspect, the situation on the ship isn't exactly going particularly well, as not all that long ago there was a mutiny, with the people on the ship fracturing into different factions who all had their own views and beliefs about how things should be handled going forward, including people who wanted to stick to the ship's original mission, alongside people seeking to forge a new path given the fact that all they've known and likely will ever know is this ship. And these factions are often at odds with each other, leaving the outskirts of the various sections of the ship often on their own, struggling just to survive, which is where we come in, with our character getting involved in some of these conflicts, learning some secrets along the way, which leads us through a branching narrative to, I believe, a total of 7 endings. And just like Age of Decadence, this game has a big emphasis on choice and their associated consequences, alongside with role-playing a very specific type of character in each individual playthrough, because on the default difficulty at least, you are not meant to be a hero or anything. Rather, you have limitations, you need to learn to work with them and find alternative solutions to quests and things that reflect the skills your character has. And because of that, the game has a relatively short runtime, but a huge focus on replayability, so I want you to keep that in mind as we move through this a little bit. Though, when you first fire up the game and go to make a new character and get started, the first thing you're going to see is this splash screen about the difficulty, and you can pick either Hero or Underdog. Underdog is the default difficulty, which is much of what I just mentioned. Hero, on the other hand, is a slightly easier option, though still leaves plenty of room for failure to be sure, that simply makes combat and things like that much easier for you, and while you can still get yourself into trouble in places you shouldn't be, Hero plays a little more like a traditional tactical RPG. You have plenty of options, more skills, more availability of various things that make the game a little more accessible. Whereas Underdog really sees you needing to lean into a very specific playstyle and play that character appropriately to really make your way through the game. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about character creation. So this is pretty similar to Age of Decadence with some big differences at the same time. While there is a slight cosmetic option where we can pick our portrait, name our character, the big thing really is our stats, our derivative skills, and the feats. Now, every decision here in character creation matters. Stat-wise, you're going to pick your main attributes, if you will. You can bring them up to 10, potentially. And with implants later, you can actually bring them up to 12. But beyond those implants, there's not really a way to increase past what you start with. And in addition to doing things that you would expect, like strength raising your melee damage, constitution helping out with your health, perception giving you better damage with ranged weapons, intelligence helping you gain skill faster, all of these attributes are also associated with various skill checks throughout the game that are going to open up or leave you out of options beyond just what they're doing in terms of numbers for your character. And then we have skills. Skills are interesting because while you will level up and everything, you won't level up and then be able to increase your skills. Leveling up is really just for feats. In order to get better at things like melee, ranged combat, exploration-focused things like biotech, computers, electronics, all that stuff, you have to actually do those things. As you lean into that playstyle, you'll level those individual skills up and become better at those things, which can lead to a character that is great at taking enemies down stealthily, or getting around barriers and obstacles via things like computers, or if you want to go all in on combat, being able to run and gun. But the main thing to note here is that while you will tag a few skills, which will increase them right at the beginning so you get a head start on what you want to do, in-game they increase as you perform those actions. And then we have feats. As you level up throughout the game, every time you level, you're going to get to pick one feat, but you also get to pick one here at character creation, with the caveat being that the heroic feats, which are feats that are only available to you if you have 10 in its associated stat, can only be picked at character creation, with the rest having to wait until later. And altogether, that makes a character creation that I wouldn't consider particularly complicated, but it has a lot of very impactful decisions that are going to very much so influence your playthrough, and you need to be mindful of those decisions right away. And I think the first chapter of the game does a great job of showcasing exactly that, because right away we awaken in an area called the Pit, which is effectively like a slum area of the ship that is technically a cargo hold, and almost immediately we get drug into a conflict in the Pit between three sort of gang lords, each with their own vision of how the place should be ran, alongside all sorts of other quests that have various outcomes and approaches. So right away the game gives you this big scenario and essentially tells you to navigate your way through it with whatever skills you happen to be best at. And the game is great at presenting options in that manner, and at the same time this is going on, you also get a lead on an initial job that bridges you to the main story, where you find some ancient tech in a bunker of the ship that leads you on a mystery to interact with the main factions I told you about at the beginning of the video. So right away, the game's emphasis on choice and consequence and leaning into a playstyle and role-playing a character gets off to a very strong start. And what's more, unlike Age of Decadence, we have proper companions in this game as well. Your actual party size is determined by things like charisma, but you can pick up companions, play the game with them, which is going to make combat much, much easier, as you might imagine. If you choose to go that route, simply having more bodies is very helpful, and I'll be interested over the course of this title to see how much they develop those characters, as many of them represent a faction at the very least, though the ones you meet in the Pit are usually just locals you might have known beforehand. But even outside of combat and their uses there, you can set up these characters to help you out with exploration-based tasks, as well as they will have their own individual skills, and for instance, you could make them good at lockpicking or something and fill the gaps of what you're trying to do with their skills, which means there's a fair bit of exploration, troubleshooting, problem solving. You can even activate stealth runs in certain areas and try to get in and out of a place quietly to solve an objective without being seen, and in that mode of the game you can even do stealth takedowns and the like. So gameplay-wise, they've got a lot going on. That said, like many CRPGs, this takes place across various maps. And in order to navigate the various sections of the ship, you can pull up the map, and places you know about or know how to get to or are available to get to, you can simply travel to right away. And then once you're in a given area, you can also fast travel to individual sub-areas, such as specific locations within that area of the ship, which is a nice little quality of life touch. And the last thing I want to touch on before I wrap this impressions video up is the combat itself. Now this is going to vary quite a bit depending on how many people you have with you, the difficulty you selected, the weapons, your character build, etc. But beyond those things, the basic combat setup isn't particularly wild or anything. It is essentially a turn-based tactical system on a grid. You can see the turn order in the top left that shows you the initiative numbers. On your character's turn, you'll have a set amount of action points to move and attack with. When it comes to your weapon, you have all sorts of choices with the various types of weapons for starters, but each individual weapon also has different firing modes, snapshots, aimed shots, burst modes for automatic rifles, for instance. And each of those costs a varying amount of action points, so being a little dynamic with those things in your approach to combat can be helpful, and that's to say nothing of consumables or defensive gadgets. There are gadgets in the game that will allow you to deflect various types of damage or potentially even cloak yourself and go invisible in combat with one of them, and the game also features a cover system. Now the tricky part with combat is it is very much so character-based, which means you might get annihilated or you might do really well if you've spec'd a character into it. Provided, of course, they are geared up appropriately. Though, much like Age of Decadence, I do believe there is a pacifist route through the game, that is to say you can talk your way out of a lot of combat situations and just not have to fight everything, and choosing to get into combat is usually just that, a choice you have made. And I'd say that's the bulk of the immediate stuff to know about Colony Ship, and in terms of a review, things I'm keeping an eye on, things I've enjoyed so far. First impressions wise, I'm really loving the immediate drama you're drawn into. I think the premise of this game is exceptionally interesting, and I'm curious if they can maintain that over the course of this game's runtime. I'm also curious how they managed to write the companions, because none of this game is really voice acted. It is very much so an indie title, and I'm curious how they managed to progress and characterize the companions, as I believe this is pretty much their first game with companions, or proper ones, as Age of Decadence didn't really have them. But the game certainly sets out on the right foot, and I'm excited to find out more about it for myself, because while this game was more or less available in its full form during early access, I did avoid quite a bit of it outside the initial areas, as I wanted to wait and see it all as a complete picture when it launched. With that in mind, as I move to review this title, I don't think it will take me a significant amount of time. As I said, the game's pretty short but replayable, and given that it's been out in early access for so long, there's tons of guides and useful information out there, so it should be pretty easy to round up everything I need to get through this one pretty quickly. But I'm especially curious to see if every path through this game manages to be a satisfying experience, or if some are left behind, that kind of thing. But as a first impression, the game certainly has a ton of promise, and I'm excited to dive into the rest of it. I'm hoping to have this review done by the end of this week or so, but that's going to do it for this particular video. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.